I resorted to everything imaginable, from the obvious selling newspapers to mowing lawns, to I told the story of selling covers off Roy Rogers comic books. But the story that some had never heard was our Kool-Aid stand. And we always did things just that much better than anybody else in Evans Mills. So we had a Kool-Aid stand at the Quincer's garage, and we had it set up, very, very nice Kool-Aid stand. But what we had that nobody else had was a jukebox. And the jukebox was a barrel, you know, this big, this high, and on the side of the barrel, the songs were listed. And there was a hole in the barrel, and you put a nickel in through the hole, indicated what song you wanted, and then you heard the song. Guess who was in the jukebox? And the first customer was Marion the librarian, and indeed she was the librarian. The nicest lady in the world down the street came to the Kool-Aid stand, and of course, because she was so wonderful, she checked out the jukebox, and she put the nickel in, and she asked to hear Bell-Bottom Trousers. Tells you how long ago it was. And the jukebox started giggling, and he wet his pants, and that was the end of the jukebox.
So thank you for that little appetizer. This is how the rest of the night is going to work. 6 storytellers are already set up to tell stories, and they'll be telling stories between 4 and 7 minutes long. And then when they're done, we're actually going to have time for any pop-up storytellers who would like to tell a story. And Claire Mendes is just going to explain really quickly how the timing works, and then Ellen's going to take it away.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. So I'm just going to be sitting over here in this corner, and I'll have a little timer going on. So after 5 minutes of telling a story, you'll hear the timer go off, and that doesn't mean you have to just like jump down and run back to your seats, just to let you know 5 minutes have passed. And then there'll be another timer 2 minutes later, so at the 7-minute mark. And again, doesn't mean you have to, well, we're not going to yank you off stage, but just to let you know, when you hear the 7-minute timer, the second timer you'll hear, just to wrap things up and sit down so we have time for even more wonderful storytellers.
Hi, good to see you all. I'm Ellen. This is not a competitive event. If you've been to any of our HAL or the sister program, The Moth, which over in Vermont you can partake of, or you hear on our airwaves, that's kind of competitive. This is not. This is where we're sharing stories of our own lives, our families' lives, work history that we're familiar with. We've gathered stories about people working across the region from as far back as the early 19th century right up to present day. And tonight's a range of stories. You'll hear a range of stories. We're going to start, though, with Helen Nerska, who, as Amy pointed out, has been our great collaborator here in Plattsburgh and for all of Clinton County. And she's going to tell us a story from her family, as I understand. So come on up. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I had notes, so I don't have them anymore. But I did want to tell you, I am telling you a story. It's really my first work. Only we didn't call it work. My family didn't call it work. We called it chores. And they're the chores that an 8-year-old dairy farmer's child would be doing. And some of them, my son was very surprised that I did all these things. But I worked inside the barn, and it was, I pitched hay from a second floor. I was in a silo pitching out silage. I I fed the cows their oats, and some got 2 cups and some got 1. And I watched, which would not work really, watched the 20-some cats when colostrum was available and they could drink it, and pet the noses of all the calves. Now, it's interesting, the calves would disappear, and somehow an 8-year-old was not told why. So then we just had new calves. So obviously they went off to be slaughtered, but I didn't know that until some time later. What was interesting too was the outside work of an 8-year-old. This was 1953. I did not, when I look back, I did not realize that what's normal today was not, what was normal then has no normalcy today. When I worked outside, we did the garden, of course, but the other thing was I had to sit on the sickle mower. I had to be the weight on the sickle mower when my father drove the tractor. So that meant you had no earphones, no distractions, and no seatbelt. So you had to hold on and make sure as he went all around the field cutting the hay. That was one of my jobs. The other job, and this honestly, this is when I was 8, I had to drive the 1948 truck around the fields. My father had to pick up the hay, and so I drove, and there were bales. They must have been done by some cooperative or something, because, or in cooperation with some other farmer, because we did not have a baler. But he would sling the bales into the back of the truck while I drove. And I was very jerky, I remember that clearly. The other thing was we did outside was I had to go after the cows. Now, I was 8 years old, and I would never have allowed my children to do what I did without, and nobody blinked. The cows were in a field that was across a river. It was near the Ausable River, and I had to take a rope bridge to go get them. And that means my hands were here and my feet were on the bottom of the rope. And so I went across by myself, went and called the cows, and they came back. Fortunately, 2 or 3 of them knew where they were going, so I really just had to shush them along. Then I had to recross that rope bridge and follow the cows home. So those are things that I would never have allowed my kids to do, but the thing that I had that was very special was that I had my parents full-time until I was about 9.5 years old. And I think that makes you, that gave me a confidence. I got full attention because they were there all the time. And I remember the day when the cows left. I was sitting outside one of our barns, and they were all being put on trucks and sent away. And my father promised me that I could go visit my favorite cow, Valentine, when I wanted to. Actually, it was a cow that I rode, that we were able to ride that cow. And so after that, it was a pretty different life because my father, like a lot of small dairy farmers, became bus drivers. And so my life changed totally, but also I was more active in school then, so I didn't suffer too much. But it was a wonderful life to be able to live on a farm like that and be working, but not really realize you're working. Oh, the question was how many cows. There were about between 20 and 25. It was a very small farm.
By the way, I've ridden those sickle bars myself. I think that was probably horse-drawn equipment that was adapted for a tractor, so you needed to have someone sitting on the sickle bar for the weight because it was meant for a horse-drawn. A farmer sitting on the sickle bar itself hitched directly to the horses, and when farmers started using them with a tractor, they had to have a weight on the seat because they weren't sitting on the seat anymore. They were sitting on the tractor. I know, because we used to do that with my neighbor and I used to hay that way. Loose hay. Eventually we got a baler. Thank you, Helen. It was great. Next up, should I get to next? Yeah, we've had, okay, so dairy farming in the 50s. Boy, has that changed, right? It's a completely, one of the things I've noticed, I'm working on an article about the last 50 years of my 50 years in the North Country, and the landscape has changed because you don't see cows on the landscape anymore. Most of you will remember when every pasture, every little farm had cows at, and now because all of the large farms keep their cows in, freestall arrangements of one kind or another, you don't see cows out on the fields. It's like losing the elm tree. It's a very dramatic landscape change. Okay, next. We have a small business owner, Tracy Rosenquest, is going to tell us about her work.
So I'm Tracy Vicory-Rosenquest, and I have only been in Plattsburgh, lived and worked in Plattsburgh, New York since 2013. My husband, Chris Rosenquest, grew up in the community, but I've been exploring who and what Plattsburgh is for only 6 years. And it's taken some time to really find the right fit of our passions and our entrepreneurial life. And 2 years ago, we opened Chapter 1 Coffee and Tea, which is a coffee shop in the Plattsburgh Public Library. And I never thought in a million years that I would be a business owner, that I would run a business, and that I would be in front of people all day long. And I think about owning a small business in a community this size almost like it's a game show sometimes. And I'm Vanna White, and I'm smiling, and I say, what do you want to drink, in a small or a large? And it's like this very strange experience sometimes. But no one never asks Vanna White what kind of day she had. No one ever asks Vanna White, are you going home to someone you love? Did they celebrate your birthday? What are you doing this weekend? And I think about, what that must be like to be on display for anyone owning a business like that. And as a woman owning a small business in a community. And 6 months ago, on a rainy, cold November morning, I'm opening my business, and it's nothing like a game show. And 2 or 3 customers in, a regular comes in. And before she opens her mouth to order half-calf black coffee, she reminds me of my grandmother. And my face drops, and my eyes well up, and I burst into 1,000 tears. 3 days earlier, I'm in Kansas driving with my father to my grandmother's funeral. And he shares with me how the last 3 or 4 weeks have been really tough, and then it wasn't fair how Grandma was treated and taken care of in the last weeks of her life. And I'm listening to my father, and I'm sharing with my father what was it like to have a grandmother like her. And I get to church, and Helen is there, and she's my grandmother's best friend. And she's 96 years old, probably wondering why everyone is dying before her. So I grab her hand, and we sit together for the whole service. But there I am in front of my regular half-calf black coffee, crying uncontrollably. And she's like, are you okay? What happened? What's going on? And I said, my grandmother just died. And I said, she was a woman of her time. She raised 4 kids. She had a great husband, a dog, an apron. She had a stack of recipe cards on her kitchen counter, written in terrible handwriting, and no one could read any of them. But she made the best poppy seed bread you've ever tasted. And my grandmother was never going to own a business. And she was never going to drink coffee, because those were things that men did. But here I am, and I own a business. And I never thought I was going to drink coffee, but now I drink coffee. And I think about my grandmother, and I think about this woman, my customer standing in front of me, who a year ago called me Fat Mama when I was pregnant with my son, because my body's on stage for everyone to see owning a business in front of people. And so it's a topic of conversation, just like, what kind of coffee did you brew today? but she was like my grandmother. And there I was standing in front of her, and owning a business in Plattsburgh as a woman serving people is complicated, and it's messy, and it requires a straight face, and toughness, and resilience, and positivity. But on that day, none of that was going on. And I really think about how being with customers in front of them all day, with myself on display, yeah, it's complicated, but it's also an incredible human experiment in being with people. Because I don't know what kind of day my customers have had, and every cup of coffee matters. And every time I smile at them, it matters, because I have no idea what they've been going through. So on a day like that, to be real, to have a real conversation, it's powerful. Thank you.
So do you love owning your small business in Plattsburgh? You loving it? You said something that totally resonated with me in the work I do. And by the way, one of the reasons I'm in radio and not television is nobody gets to see me. It's a real plus. But, you talked about everyone has a story. I mean, that is what drives my life almost in the work I do, is every time I find myself ready to make an assumption about someone I meet, oh, he voted for Trump, she voted for Hillary, I know everything about you. Time and time again, people surprise me with the intricacies of our lives and the special experiences that bring people to wherever they are at this moment. So that really nailed it for me. Okay, who's up next? Actually, I have to take my glasses off to read. I have good close-up, but terrible far. Henry Morlock is going to come up now. And I think this should be just about right for you, Henry. And remember, your bad foot first, right? Or is it the good foot first? Good foot first. Going up and bad foot coming down.
Thank you. Reminded. Yeah.
I think that mic should be good for you.
Looks pretty good.
You want me to take your pen?
Oh, yeah, just hang it over there. It'd be great. Yeah, I've had a knee replacement. That's why I'm hobbling around here. Let me say at the beginning, I hadn't ever thought of us college people, because that's what I am. I've been at the college over here for loads of years, 34 roughly, and then 19 more. As part of the working group here, as part of the whole milieu of all of us, the dairy farmers, the lumbermen and all. But I can see today that we are all one family. We just do different kinds of things here. And I am enjoying hearing what you all are doing. And I'll bet you will enjoy what we're doing too over at the college and over at the Canton and the other places. I'll bet unless you go back to your own experiences, you don't remember just what it's like to be in a classroom. And you probably have no idea what we're doing over there. And I don't have a whole lot of idea, because my colleagues, they all do different things. And that's the way we started out. We started out coming up to Plattsburgh, my wife and I, in a 1960 Volkswagen. The year was 1964. We got as far as Lake George, and the Northway petered out. From there on in, it was Route 9. And I saw the sign, something like Plattsburgh, 97 miles. And I had just previously looked up where Plattsburgh was in the National Geographic. And I thought, where on earth is this place? And it was snowing. We were behind a school bus, struggling along. Finally, we got to the Wither Hotel, where we were put up for the night. And, we didn't know what to expect in the morning. But it was glorious. It was, you know, the snow here and the coldness, it's so crystalline. It's so different from Philadelphia and New York City and Washington. And it was just a glorious morning. We woke up and we were driven all around, and I just knew this was the place for us. I wanted to be here. And at that point, the college was transferring into a arts and science college. It only had just moved in that direction. I'm sorry, I'm sort of echoing here. That had moved in that direction, I think, in '63. So the college was undergoing rapid growth, hiring lots of people. All of us were in our 20s. We all got here with the same feeling that what we wanted to do was recreate a little bit of that utopian educational experience that we had all wished we had had. We wanted to have fun, engagement, have the students see real meaning in their lives, have positive relationships with everybody, and let us all achieve stuff that's important. And when you had parties in those days, you had to invite everybody, all the other departments and the administration and so on, or else you didn't have enough. You know. So we all got together frequently and worked together to get things going. So what did we do? Well, I was hired as an animal psychologist. In those days, Skinnerian technology, which is rats pressing bars inside the little aluminum boxes. Just imagine a box about a foot on each side. The job of the rat, he doesn't know it at first, is to press this little bar that's protruding out, and if he does that, he'll get a drop of water, which will come down in a chute that's right beside it. And the job of the student is to train the rat to do that, and in so doing, we'll learn about the principles of reinforcement and see how important the timing of the whole thing is. And that will carry right over to all of his natural life. Well, it takes about 2 hours to do that. If a student is attending closely to the rat, you put the rat in one of these cages, and he goes charging around, sniffing here and there because he's excited. He doesn't know where he's been. He's never been here before. He doesn't know what's coming after this moment. So the rat has to settle down. The student settles down. And within about 2 hours, the rat and the student are getting along pretty well. The rat wanders over to the water spigot when he wants some water, and the student clicks the clicker, and he gets the water, and soon he's doing it all himself. The student just turns the clicker over to him, so to speak. Well, we were working with groups of maybe 12 students at a time, maybe 5 or 6 sections a week. We didn't have enough faculty to cover that sort of thing, so we put the senior students to work, and they loved being coaches, basically. And we got this feeling of all working together that was so desirable. And the students, who were actually the trainers, well, at first they weren't sure what they were getting into. You can imagine the students being told, you're going to have a rat of your own and you have to take care of it. Well, actually, we would feed it and stuff on our own if the student really didn't have to do that part. Some of the students were scared. Some of the students were sure they were going to get bitten. Nobody got bitten. And some of the students did get scared, though. And some of the rats were scared. There. One student in particular was the head of the student association. I won't tell you his name. He was a very strong, bold-looking guy. But we finally got him to put a rat in his pocket and to walk around with it for a little bit. But what I'm telling you this for is we had an occasion that is rare, that only the students in that section really had an opportunity to see, and it was so glorious, really. One of the rats was going on and on, not learning. This actually was the student's fault. The rat eventually did learn, to make a long story short, to press the bar. But what the rat did, and the student came running over and said to me, Dr. Morlock, the rat has finally learned, you know. But he said, there's something wrong because the rat's paws are bleeding. And I thought, oh my God, there's nothing sharp, there's no knives around in there. So we ran over there, and what the rat was doing, because this is what the rat had figured out in his ratty way, was he ran to the back of the box and then ran over the front of the grids on the floor and then leaped up to the top of the wall in the front of the box and then slid, uncurled his little paws, and his paws were bleeding because they were uncurled around his sharp aluminum. And he slid down the wall. It's the only time I've ever heard of this. He pressed the bar with his belly and then collapsed on the floor. And he did that a time or two. My student was feeling very bad for the poor rat. And I said, don't worry about it. There's another rule of behavior that holds for everybody, and that is people will tend to do whatever they're doing with the least effort. And the rat learned it all. So those were the kind of things that we did. We had students coming in. We had students helping us. We had other faculty watching us. And we were an active, fun group. And I want to tell you of one more thing, maybe two if we have the time. And I want you to act as students, if you don't mind, here. I'm going to tell you a story, and their story involves a sort of off-color word. Now, we're in this nice, holy place, and it's going to be recorded. It's going to go down into the archives. I want you to act as the bleeper. And when you detect that this word is coming up, it's going to come up a couple times, yell, bleep, bleep, or something to that effect. Or if you don't get it quite before I say the word, say it afterwards yourself. Okay? This story is one I told all my Psych 101 kids when we got to that part of the course on punishment. Punishment is something none of us like to really carry out or even think much about, but it happens, and you have to be ready to do it as kindly and as appropriately as possible. One of the things that gets in the way of administering those negative consequences is timing. Timing in such a way that whoever is being punished knows what he or she is being punished for. Because a lot of times parents, in training rats as well as kids and all, they come in too slow. They're late on what they should have. Anyway, imagine this. Dad is sitting down at breakfast. Little Billy comes down and sits down on across the table. And Father says, what kind of cereal would you like for this morning? And Billy says, I don't know, but I know I don't want any of those. What do you think I would say? Cheerios, right. And the father says, what? We don't speak like that around here. Let's do that one again. Tell me now, what is it you want for your breakfast? And he says, please, Father, I would like some of those Cheerios. Right. And the father says, oh my God, you didn't get it. This is terrible. I'm going to tell your mother, and you'll be punished for this. But try it one more time. And the little kid says, please, Father, I don't know which of these cereals I'm supposed to have, but I know I don't want any of those Cheerios. So I'd like to tell jokes. I think our faculty up here really do try very hard to put good humor on the difficult aspects of education. And thank you for listening. Thank you very much, Alan. Nice to meet you.
Bad foot first.
They were all bad, right?
So just for any of you who aren't real familiar with North Country at work, Amy gave you a little bit of a feel for it. The project grew out of sort of several motivations. First and foremost, honestly, is we wanted to get into communities across the Adirondack North Country that we don't go to very often, that maybe aren't the source of the big news stories that you hear. We wanted to get into every little community across the region. We're estimating there are probably 120 to 150 locations we will eventually visit for the project. And we wanted to tell the story of towns, kind of town by town, using work as the centering theme, because work is what we called in the early days of the project the beating heart of any community. And it is. It is very much the heart of community. It's what tends to start communities, sustain them, and change. The community changes as the work changes. So it started as primarily a photography project. We wanted to do something in our digital space. And it very quickly became obvious that stories, especially for a radio station, are as compelling and as important as the photographs. So now it is really very much both story and photographs. And in the case of these exhibits we do with our partners, these become part of the permanent collection of the institution we're working with. We don't have any need for photographs on a radio station and hanging on the walls, but the Historical Association certainly can use it. So we've done this in a number of locations already, leaving the photographs in the library of the Historical Association. So that's a little more about the project, just so you have a little better sense. Amy and Claire have done an amazing job in the past year of organizing events. We're going into the second year now. We're just in the beginning of the second year, and we see this project as embedded in the life of the station now. It's no longer a kind of special project. It's one of the things North Country Public Radio does. So, there. Okay, onward. Heidi Fortsch, who works with fiber, and you talked about another story you were going to tell, but you come on up and tell people what you want to talk about.
This looked so easy before. Okay. So my name is Heidi Fortsch, and I own a small business in Shazy, Brown Dog Fiber Art Studio. I make yarn. So I wanted to share a story about a pivotal moment in the life of my business where a sort of strange thing happened and the direction completely changed. So I started out spinning yarn because I was unhappy with the fiber offerings in the big box stores, and I bought a spinning wheel and taught myself to spin. I started dyeing fiber, and then all of a sudden I was selling yarn. So there I was, spinning traditional yarn, the yarn that you think of when you think of yarn. And I was selling it well, and I was making way more than I could sell. So I was looking for more and more outlets to sell it. I started researching wheels that were more and more efficient than the wheel that I had. So when you think of a spinning wheel, you think of a large Canadian production wheel. Quebec and upstate New York was sort of famous for its textile industry. So there are still 100-year-old spinning wheels around that you could refurbish and use for years to come. So I started looking at those. And in my heart was a completely different wheel. I was lusting after a spinning wheel. It's a thing. And a thing that I do. So this wheel that I was lusting after was very modern looking, nothing like the Canadian production wheel that I had in my brain. Like, this is the thing that I need to do to make this business profitable. But in my heart was this other wheel. It looks nothing like a spinning wheel. So I had these two sort of competing spinning wheels in my life. I mentioned to a friend that I was interested in selling yarn in New York City. That was a big goal. I don't know why. And his response to me was, so do it. So I started researching independently owned yarn shops in New York City, and I found one that I thought would be a great fit. And I showed up with my traditionally spun, beautiful yarn, and the owner was so sweet. And she said to me, "This is lovely, but I can't sell this here." And she probably saw the dejected look on my face as I was packing up my yarn. And she asked me if I had a little bit of time. And I said, of course, I've got all weekend. And she showed me a few websites of this crazy yarn. I think my jaw maybe dropped open a little bit as she was showing me. And she said she was looking for someone that might be able to make this yarn and be her supplier in New York City. And before my brain could really jump into action, my heart and my soul said yes. Yes, which may have been the most stupid thing I've ever said in my whole life. But I said yes. And I didn't have the wheel. I didn't have the material. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But I said yes. And so we talked a little bit more, and a week later I found myself at the New York Sheep and Wool Association show. It's a massive show. If you are a fiber enthusiast, go. Be prepared. Bring some body armor, as you need it. I came to the first booth that I saw that had this particular spinning wheel that I'd been lusting after, and I bought it. It was the first thing I did. And it completely changed the entire trajectory of my yarn business. Art yarns are the only thing I make, basically. I'm selling them here, locally, in New York City, Vermont, and now New Jersey. So I guess my reason for sharing this story is just to remind you that when you have that stirring in your soul that doesn't quite make sense, to follow it, because it can potentially change your entire life. So, thank you.
That was a great reminder of the tradition of spinning across the region. When we were in Hammond, New York, we were in the Historical Association there has a refurbished, traditional 19th century homestead kind of thing. And upstairs, there's a spinning wheel. And apparently, many, many farmhouses had spinning wheels where sometimes the women spun yarn, but more often there were traveling spinners. Often they were men who used, you probably know this, who used these wheels and we have some photographs of these tools. It is indeed a long tradition of the region. And it was on a very micro level too, not just a big industrial level. It was very micro in homesteads across the region. Thanks for that. Our next storyteller is the pro, Cindy Snow. She's up here. She's got a family business story to tell.
That's too much of a workout. Oh, wait, how do I do this?
Oh, let me help you.
Oh, it's tight. Yeah. I am no pro, really. I'm.
A little tall, or it's either that or. Yeah. Yeah, I'm worried that's going to be too low for you.
Well, last time I did this, it went off altogether. So.
Oh, you break equipment?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So listen, I'm a little bit of a squirrel. Squirrel? Where is it? Where's squirrel? So I brought some cards, so I stay on track, so it might be 7 minutes and not 14. That's just the way I am. So most of you know me as a chef, right? You've seen me in restaurant business, but does anybody know how I got there? Because this is a story. It's 1963. The only home I ever knew was a 3-unit apartment building on the corner of Jabez Allen Road and Bear Swamp. It was a real dump, and I moved there when I was 3. It was kind of interesting. My mom and dad, Maz and Joe, my sister Sandy, my dog Mandy, I'm Cindy, Sandy, Mandy, 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. I swear. Never knew my name. My mom, Maz, she was the breaker of ceilings. She broke the glass ceiling. She worked outside the home from the 50s on. She was an interior decorator in Plattsburgh, New York, at, believe it or not, we had an Ethan Allen store. The back seat of her car was filled with these big books, fabrics, wallpaper, and these little things that were colors. They're called paint chips. My dad, he just had a job at Georgia Pacific Mill. He was production supervisor, but he worked 9 to 5. My mom, she worked all the time. Dad did most of the cooking, and one of the coolest things about our house on Bear Swamp Road, we had indoor fire pit. Like, you could grill steaks inside, and there was a suck-it-up vent over the house, over that. It was really kind of cool. And he taught me all these crazy games. First game he ever taught me was the janitor game. He'd open this door, this magic door, and he'd pull out these toys called a broom and a mop. And wow, woo, let's play janitor game, woo-hoo. And then the next thing he taught me was the memory game. Now most people, right, you play it with cards. No, I had a nut, I had a bowl, I had a washer, and baby food jars. Boom, 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 every single day. But his favorite game of all in that big house was the carpenter game. And he would say to me, he's like, hog on to the ass end of that board, it's coming through the table saw, get ready. Spike, that was my nickname. Or, come on, pull those nails out, because I'm going to burn that wood, and I don't want any nails in the fire pit. Yep, that was another one. But my favorite that he taught me to do was take this rag and dip it into this magic sauce and rub it across the wood. It was called staining. Our family was no stranger to all that hard work. And our 3-bedroom, 3-unit apartment house became this amazing showcase of 6 bedrooms, 3 baths, that my mom and dad, the creative team of Maz and Joe, made into a beautiful, spectacle, wonderful place to live. I was living the life every single day. I had the white go-go boots with the hot pants. We had a color TV, and we got 3 channels. It was amazing. On Sunday nights, my mom never cooked. That's a real thing. She would make French toast right before Walt Disney came on. Then things changed. It was a little weird. My uncle came home. He was 10 years older than my dad. He had flown 666 missions in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He had made some money, and he bought this airplane. It was an acrobatic plane. It was called a Pitts Special. So he decided to talk my dad and I into doing air shows. Oh yeah, this is fun. Shortest runway in the Adirondacks, which was basically a piece of plywood on our Woody station wagon that my dad was driving. I'm waving out the window like Opie with the red hair and big buck teeth, and my and my uncle would come in and land it on there. But I knew somehow things were changing. My dad was 39 at this point, and I was 9. So I started hearing my mom whispering to my grandmother, I think he's having a midlife crisis. And I was like, oh my God, midlife crisis? I've heard my friends talk about midlife crisis. Midlife crisis? My friends' dads got new hair. They got cars with 2 seats, and kids weren't allowed. And worst of all, some kids got new moms. Midlife crisis was a really bad thing. I was pretty scared. Then I heard my mom tell my grandmother, I think Joe wants to be a bush pilot in Alaska. Bush pilot in Alaska? I didn't even know what that was. All I knew was it was cold there, and I need like mucklucks. Not my go-go boots, but mucklucks. And people ate blubber. I had heard it at school. It was awful. So my dad went to Flying Nuns Aviation, and he learned how to fly. Uh-oh. I think we're going to Alaska. Then he went to Lake Winnipesaukee and learned how to fly float planes. Uh-oh, getting closer. The next thing I heard, little kid ears eavesdropping down the stairs. Maz, I quit my job. Maz, I'm selling the house. Maz, I bought a 180 Cessna on floats. I was like, oh my God. Now my mom, you'd never know it by my size, but she was 5'10", a beautiful debutante from Long Island, New York. And she had been one of those yes, yes, yes wives for a really long time. But what she really did that day was stand up to my dad. She was just a nidge taller than he was. And she looked at him and says, Joe, we are not going to Alaska. Joe, you've got to find a way to support yourself with that airplane, and where the hell are we going to live? Let's do the math. They sold the house on Bear Swamp Road, $75,000. He bought that plane for $35,000, and he had a little money left over. You know what he did? He bought a trailer park. Yep, my nice house, gone. My nice clothes, gone. I was a trailer park kid, and the next pair of boots I was going to get were going to be those bread bags inside your Converse. That's all I did. So my dad thought the trailer park was going to make enough money to like sustain us, but it's not that hard to own a trailer park, right? There's not that much work to do. People pay the rent once a month, and that's all you got. So he decided, he owned the plane, he was going to get instrument rated, then commercial rated, and that took gas, which took money. Now my mom's still working, right? Selling furniture, all that stuff. So she's saying to him, listen, if you're going to spend all that money on gas, you better be doing something with it. You better get it together. So he cooked up this crazy idea that he was going to fly to Boston, pick up lobster, and load it in the back of the plane, and fly all the way back to Plattsburgh, New York, and we were going to find people to buy it. So the beginning of our business is we bought all these lobster pots, you know, the black one with the bottom and the top, and it has the holes, and he'd load that with corn and potatoes and lobster and clams, and we were selling them. It was a success. Nobody could believe it was a success. And then people wanted fish. So we started bringing fish. And then firemen wanted clams for their fireman field day. So we had to buy a truck. It just got bigger and bigger. Then restaurants wanted lobster. So once again, my dad put me to work. It was a new game this time. And we built these huge tanks that held about 300 lobsters each. So they were made out of wood. They were all epoxied. We went to Boston, met this guy that sold the chemicals to make ocean water. We mixed it all together in the hot water. We dumped it in the tanks. We turned on the pumps, aerated the tanks, flew to Boston, got more lobster. Guess who was the co-pilot most of the time? But anyways, we started that business, and next thing you know, we're selling lobster, storing lobster. He didn't tell me the hardest part about that whole thing. I'd have to get in the lobster tank with all the lobsters going like this, wah, 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 wah. And I would have to use a squeegee to, kind of swoop the stuff down like you do in a barn with manure, but it was lobsters. Ooh, it was a little crazy. But anyways, one thing turned into another. So the next thing that happened is we opened a store, and we were selling seafood and this and that in the store. And then the next thing that happened is we opened a restaurant called The Wharf, and it became a really crazy big business. And it was really exciting as a kid growing up in that business. So I'm not sure my dad ever went to Alaska, but I am sure that his legacy lives on. I knew I'd get emotional at this part, and I really worked through it. His legacy lives on because when you go to Plattsburgh and you eat at Pasquale's or Hobie's, Blue Collar Bistro, Dub's Barbecue, his blood lives in all of us as children of the legacy of the lobster. Thank you.
I like the style. A lot of style there with the cards. It's really special, very special. Thank you, my dear. We're gonna, our last planned storyteller is about to tell a bit about his work, or a side gig of his, actually. And then we have, I know at least one person who's come forward and said they do a pop-up story. If anyone else is inspired to tell a little story of their work, we'd love to hear it, or their family's work. But let's wrap up the sort of first segment of this with Bill Landry. Please welcome Bill.
First hurdle. How's this? Good, good, good. Okay. William Landry. I have an interesting side gig, as Ellen referred to it. I'm the marriage officer for the city of Plattsburgh. And this is something I've been doing now for, since 2001, I discovered it when I did a little research. But I was working at Plattsburgh State. Some students came to me, I think I was Dean of Students at the time, and said, we really would like you to marry us. And so at the time, you could go to the Common Council here in Plattsburgh and get authorization to be certified to do a wedding for about a week. But at the time they went, the city was looking for someone to do the job for 3-year terms. So I ended up getting a 3-year appointment to do weddings and be the marriage officer for the city. This is something I've been doing ever since as a volunteer, and it's interesting work. People getting married tend to be of a certain mindset. They're happy. They're looking forward to the future, and it's a very it's just an enjoyable thing to do, and it's totally random. The phone can ring at any time, and people call, and some people plan a year in advance, and some people plan a week in advance, and some people plan a day in advance. One day I got a phone call when the person says, we need to get married, and I said, oh, when were you thinking? They said, well, could you do it right now? The person they'd arranged for to do the wedding hadn't shown up, and they were sort of at loose ends. And so I said, as it turned out, I could do it, and so I went and did the wedding for them. But I do weddings, and sometimes it's a lovely venue like the chapel. Other times it can be, the side yard, the backyard, the hospital room, the bar room. I don't have to make anything up in terms of where these things take place, because it sort of all just happens, and needless to say, over the years, all those years with all those weddings, you end up with stories, and I'll just tell you a few of my favorite stories in terms of weddings that are memorable to me. Most for the right reasons, okay. And I was doing a wedding at the gazebo down by the mouth of the Saranac River, and everybody's in place, and we're getting ready to do the wedding, and something caught my caught my eye. And I look, and I said to the groom, "Are you wearing a tail?" And he said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am. That's my lucky tail." Protruding out of the back of his pants is this large, bushy, black tail. I said, "Where did that come from?" "Oh, I shot it. It's a black fox that I've kept the tail, and I wear it for a special occasion." Huh? Okay, so we proceeded with the wedding. That's, again, just an example of what, who would expect that somebody would be wearing a tail at their wedding. Another wedding I did, this was here in, all my weddings are in Plattsburgh because that's where my jurisdiction is. I noticed there was something strange going on. The bride came sidling out of the room. I was doing where she'd been waiting for the wedding to get ready, and moving awkwardly. And I thought, what is going on here? The groom is standing, waiting for the bride. The bride shows up, and then all was revealed. The bride was being married in a borrowed dress, and the borrowed dress did not zip up the back. So she had to position herself in such a way that the guests weren't observant of the large V created by, on her back, created by the zipper that would not close. Now, someone asked me, they said, what's sort of one of the, have you had, negative experiences? And this isn't really a negative wedding experiences, but it's sort of a sad experience. A couple days after I'd performed a wedding, the bride came to my office and said, "Could you unmarry us?" And I said, "No." I said, I can't unmarry you. I said, that's called a divorce, and for that you have to get an attorney. Things just had gone from bad to worse, and she wanted out of the wedding, but that's not the way it works. Probably one of the sweetest weddings I've ever done was fairly recently, in fact. It was an elderly couple. Each of them had lost their spouse. She was in her late 70s. He was in her early 80s. And they came to get married at City Hall down in one of the public rooms. And they were both beautifully dressed for a wedding. Their families were both there cheering them on. And they were just the sweetest couple. And I just find those moments very rewarding in a sense, because it's like, go for it. I mean, here it is, have the wedding. And everybody was supportive. It's a little different, when the groom is early 40s and the bride is 20. How do weddings turn out? You have no way of knowing. There is no way to keep track of what my track record is of weddings I've performed and how many of them have held together. Years ago, I did a wedding at the President's House on the Plattsburgh State campus. 2 international students were getting married, and the interesting thing about that wedding was that it was live streamed to the international students' home country. Here we are in Plattsburgh, New York, and the wedding is being live streamed back to Romania and Mexico. Love goes where it's sent. I mean, what can you say? So that was a little bit unique and interesting. So, as I said, there's no way to predict. I've subsequently heard that couple did divorce, and in fact have each remarried. So, I guess it boils down to sort of que sera, sera. What will be, will be. So that's my volunteer, part-time, on-demand job that I do for the city of Plattsburgh, and I get a great deal of pleasure out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. that was great. That was great. How many weddings do you think you've performed, do you know?
Oh my gosh, a few hundred.
Wow.
Well, we're in the season now.
Yes,
June.
June.
In fact, why I'm dressed.
Why are you here tonight?
I had a wedding late this afternoon.
Ah, okay, all right. So I know of one person who's offered to, is it Ann Gearheart? Yeah. Ann, are you still here? There you are. Are you going to do a little pop-up story for us about your work or some work you've done? As I said to Ann earlier, she has the best prop anyone could have. Her service dog. Oh, she's not bringing the service dog up here. Okay, all right. Let me see how tall you are. Get up here. We'll lower this a bit.
I love the cards, by the way.
Yeah.
And had I been prepared, that's probably exactly what I would have done.
There you go.
Thanks. So it's July 1959, and I'm 14. And my parents have gone on a vacation to Niagara Falls. And we're coming back through the Thousand Islands when my parents say they're going to visit a friend's daughter at a summer camp. Surprise. Now, you know the Adirondacks are peppered with these summer camps that many of them have disappeared. So I'm sitting in the back seat, what do I know? And we are winding through roads, the likes of which were very unfamiliar to me, but very familiar to you. And the trees were coming in and the roads were getting smaller, and it was 5:30 in the evening. But somehow my father seemed to know where he was going, but he'd never been there. And we turned off of a paved road onto a dirt road full of rocks, and the trees were now hanging over the road. And we went down this road, and there was this building. And we pulled in next to the building, and the building had a name. It was called the Owl. And in the Owl, there were 3 big rooms: a girls' dining room, a guest dining room, and a boys' dining room, not to mention the kitchen and the place where you wash the dishes. And at 5:45 on that night, we were invited to stay for dinner. I give you those details not because they're important to you, but because they changed my life. I grew up in this Germanic household where stories were not told at the dinner table. As a matter of fact, you didn't talk at all. Dinner was for eating. I'm sitting in a guest dining room with boys making noise and singing songs, and girls singing songs, and great cacophony of noise and talking. And I'm a verbal person who lived in the family of the nonverbal people. After dinner, we were taken on a tour of the camp, and I discovered each one of the buildings had a name after a bird, like the blue heron or the barn swallow or the flicker or whatever. And each time my feet are on these little paths winding through the woods, I'm more transfixed by this place. Now, I had been to Girl Scout camp in Maryland, where I'm from, but it was nothing like this. And my heart was like, wow, people get to come to this place and stay for the whole summer. So now we have to find a place to spend the night, someplace out of a very unusual place called Osable Forks, New York. And the camp director, who somehow knew my father, says, maybe I would like to stay for the rest of the summer. You don't even show an expression on your Germanic face that says, oh yes, I'd like to do this. No, because I knew it wasn't possible. My parents were working people. They didn't have money to send kids to summer camp. So there was no conversation. But the camp director said she'd work something out. I didn't even have any clothes except the suitcase. But my parents drove south to Baltimore, and I stayed at this camp for that summer. I had the most wonderful time. I met the most wonderful people. Bill and I are still friends. Bill calls it the class of 45, because that's when we were born. You're welcome. And so at the end of the summer, I know that this magical experience is not going to be a happening thing. My mother even writes the camp director a letter and tells her that. And I'm really kind of upset about it. Camp director, kind of an extraordinary person who said she knew how much this place meant to me. Maybe I could have like a scholarship and I could come back the next summer if I could raise half the money and then I could work in the kitchen. So when I went home, like Fred, I shoveled snow and cut grass and raked leaves and collected enough money in dollar bills and $5 bills that I could go back the next summer. So I was a camper for 2 or 3 summers. We had all kinds of interesting awards, the best award in my whole life. I went on to have a pretty good career, but the best award was the little trophy for all-around camper, which I got. And then I was a counselor in training, a CIT, and then I was a counselor because I had learned about the hiking trails in your beautiful Adirondack Mountains, and I had learned to paddle a canoe on the Saranac and all the lakes, and I became a counselor, which was paving the way for me to become an educator, which I did for my whole life. Some of the kids at the camp that Bill and I went to, really their parents had a lot of money. And quite a few of the kids had these things called signet rings, which meant nothing to me at the time. But for my 21st birthday, my parents asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted a signet ring, but it had to have something very special engraved in it. So they said, okay, do what you want to do. So the first verse of the 121st Psalm is engraved in my ring, which is, anybody in this wonderful chapel? I will lift mine eyes to the hills, and those hills are your Adirondacks. Still wear it today.
That doesn't exactly sound like a work story. That sounds like a love story. It's really wonderful. Thank you. I have to also tell you that I grew up in a household with the exact opposite experience at the dinner table. Everyone was screaming and yelling, and often someone stormed off to their bedroom in the middle of dinner, and you were expected to argue about the politics or issues of the day. Yeah, very different. Anyone else want to tell us? Oh, come on up. Tell us your name.
My name is Sarah Rowden.
Sarah Rowden?
Sarah Rowden, yes.
Sarah,
Thank
it's
you.
all yours.
All right, I didn't really...
That's pretty good right there.
Oh, okay, I'm good. Yeah. All right. I didn't really plan on speaking, but I do have kind of a unique work experience up here in the North Country. My husband was in the Air Force, and that's what brought us to the North Country in 1972. My husband had been raised in Texas, and I had been raised in Illinois. And so when we were told we were coming to Plattsburgh, New York, we figured we were coming to a city. We had no clue. And we started north, up the Northway, and said, oh my God, look where we are. This is amazing. So we got up here, and because we had lived in many different places, I just picked up work wherever I could. So I've done a lot of kind of interesting and bizarre things. But we got up here, and my first job up here was teaching airmen at the Air Force Base. It was a Clinton Community College program, and it was designed to prepare airmen to get their GEDs, because at that time, they didn't have to have a high school diploma to get into the Air Force. And there were 2 different groups. There was the GED group, and then there was the group who needed to at least read at a 9th grade reading level. And that was important, because my husband flew airplanes, and those guys repaired his airplane, and I wanted to make sure they could read the manual. So, do you remember the old sitcom Welcome Back, Kotter, with the sweat hogs? That's what it was. That's exactly what it was. These were hardcore school haters. They did not like school, and I had to teach them English and reading and correct grammar. They came from the inner cities, they came from the Appalachian Mountains, they came from situations that I had no idea. I grew up in Illinois. You know, what did I know? But it was an amazing experience, and I felt like actually that was one of the best things that I ever did, because about 60% of our guys would graduate. There were a few women, but it was mostly men. About 60% of them would go on to take something at Clinton Community College afterwards. And there was a real good success with their GEDs and their reading levels. So it was an amazing experience for me. But that was my connection with the military, with the Air Force. But as I continued to live here, and we chose to live here, we left for 3 years and came back, and we chose to make this our home. And I became aware of, worked with, and associated with so many different groups of people up here in the North Country. When we came back, we went to Omaha, Nebraska, where I worked with adolescents in a psychiatric hospital. And when we came back, I ended up working at an organization, an agency called the Northern New York Center. One of my fellow workers is with me today. And I worked there for quite a few years, and therefore worked with people who lived in this community who had mental health issues. And that was certainly a whole new population that I had not been aware of before when we had lived in Plattsburgh before. And from there, I moved into another agency where I worked at the Champlain Valley Family Center, a drug treatment agency. So I became involved with, again, another segment of the population of the North Country. And it has all been tremendously, tremendously positive. But after working in the mental health field and working in the addiction field, I felt like I needed to take a break and get into something a little easier. So I got into politics. And I became a county legislator, you know, and there it was like, actually, in many ways, it was easier, but I did encounter a whole new group of people. And I did that for a lot of years, and it was very interesting because I had the opportunity to be on the legislature when we voted to develop the Plattsburgh International Airport. And that was going to be on the flight line that my husband had flown an FB-111 a bazillion times on and off to that runway, and then I got to make that decision or be part of that. So that was very exciting. I got out of politics. I worked down at Whiteface Mountain teaching snowboarding, and one of my fellow snowboard instructors is out here in the audience, Brenda, and so I was exposed to another new group. And while I was a legislator, I did go through breast cancer, and that opened up some opportunities for me. And I created, with another friend, a group of women called the Booby Sisters. And I am now the head booby. Yeah.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I love the teaching story. Love the teaching story. Yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience. Thanks for that. Anyone else want to share? Is that Gerry back there? Come on up. We'll get to you next, okay? Gerry and then you, okay? Come on, Gerry. Gerry and I actually go way back. We go back to early 80s, mid 80s.
We do indeed.
We did some talking about books on the air back in the day. Yeah.
I think so. Sarah's mention of the Air Force Base and so on just reminds me. I came to, and this is not very personal, it just is more about perspective and the changes that have occurred. I came to teach at Peru Central in 1969, and I had come from Central New York where I was teaching at Camden School. And right now, I believe there are, in K-12 in Clinton County, there's about 10,000 students. That's all. In Peru, for a while, when the air base was here and when the air base was growing and big, we had 4,800 students. We had almost half as we have in the whole county now. We went on what we call split session. So the high school students came in and arrived and started their classes at 7 a.m. They finished at 12:30. Junior high school students showed up, and they went until 12:30 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And sometimes you'd be teaching, and they'd say, McGovern, so-and-so is not coming in. Can you sub in the afternoon? And I would, of course. It's another $35, so I would do that. And, but the loss, when the base closed, there's all kinds of ramifications. But for me, and what we saw was the tremendous diversity that was present here in Clinton County for a while there. Not just the obvious, in terms of African Americans, there was a contingent at Plattsburgh Air Base that was broader than and more, larger than the rest of the Clinton County. But the students, they came to us from, some of them had been in Guam last year, they had been in Japan last year, they had been in Germany last year, and they brought, and Omaha, and they brought that kind of experience. And the things that I was so impressed with, the students that I had that from the air base, they seemed to be two things that they had. Once, they had a sense of structure. They knew that if, whoever is in charge is actually in charge. They don't have to be right. They just have to be in charge. And they sort of did what they were supposed to do most of the time, which in school is just great. And then the other thing that they brought was this ability to sort of fit in. They had been elsewhere for 3 years. Then they got up, they moved, they came here, and they fit in. And they played sports or they played in the band. They did these things that sort of fit everybody else. And we created some kind of community. So that, all I'm mentioning, and it reminds me when you mentioned the cows are gone from the fields, we have also lost the air base, which has changed the landscape for us. Things were really quite different here at that time, and it was a very large school system that had 5 buildings, lots of teachers, and I remember when it closed, what a change that was, and as a union member, we were looking at, that's really going to change. If the student population is going to go down from, it was 3,100 at that time, if it's going to go down to 1,900, they're probably going to think we need fewer teachers. My job was to convince them that they need just as many teachers as they always have. Doesn't matter. But anyway, that's what I wanted to say about Peru Central and how it's changed and what we did lose when that airbase closed. Thank you.
By the way, Gerry, if you ever want the perfect student, she's sitting right over there, Amy. I know because I went back to college and took a writing seminar that she was in as a senior, and she's like the teacher's dream student right there. And I have a feeling Claire is a close second. Was the perfect student.
The only teacher that kicked me out of the classroom is this guy. I think I talk too much.
No.
It's true.
I think we have one final story coming from this gentleman. Yeah, you. Oh, okay. Back there. You got it. You'll wrap it up, okay? Tell us your name and away you go.
Okay. My name is Jim Gratton. When I was 23 years old in 1978, I was a new master control operator at WPTZ. It's a place I worked at for 31 years, and I was the guy behind the peacock suit, too, by the way, for 11 years, and there's a lot of stories about that. But tonight I want to tell you, when I was new at the station, I didn't really know anybody. I'd moved up here from Glens Falls. But there was a new gentleman that was working with us. He was about my age, a little older, and we just kind of hit it off. Now, back in those days, the master control operators would work until 2 in the morning. After Tom Snyder signed off, we'd sign the station off the air and go home. And the place was pretty empty until the next board operator, master control operator, came in the next morning at 6 o'clock. Well, one Friday night I realized that John, my new friend, was going to be the first master control operator in the building at 6 o'clock. And there I was all by myself, and I thought, gee, I wonder what I could do as a joke for John. And I just realized that back in those days we had cart machines. It looked like an 8-track type of thing, only this was full track, and it had a cue. So if you wanted it to stop, there was a track that just told it to start and stop. I unplugged that and made a continuous loop on a 15-second tape cartridge, and I recorded something to the effect, "John, help me, John. John, I need help in here. Give me a hand, John." That thing played on the cart machine, and I had turned the volume up so when he came into the door the next morning, he could hear this and think, oh, poor Jimmy's in trouble. What's going on in there? Then I realized, too, the production crew had used a mannequin in the studio that evening, and it was posed something like this. And so I took the mannequin over in front of the tape machine. Back in those days, we had big reel-to-reel tape machines that would hold an hour's worth of videotape, and you'd stand at them. So it was perfect. We had an old videotape that was kind of worthless. So I unraveled a lot of the tape, put it on the floor, wrapped it around the mannequin's head and arms so it looked like he had had trouble threading the machine. All the while, the machine is playing, "Help me, John, help me." So I thought this would be a pretty good thing because as minute he cracked that door to the control room, the first thing he would see was the mannequin with all this tape and, of course, the tape going. So I arranged all that, and I signed off and went home and just waited to kind of bond with my new friend Saturday morning when I called him. Unfortunately, I forgot that the janitor was there. He came in like at 2:30 to clean up when there was nobody in the place, and Dave wasn't too technical, and he didn't know how to turn anything off or down, so that thing played for 4 hours, and Dave let me know about it. The next time I saw Dave in the break room, he asked me, "Do you know how to turn that down when that thing's loud in there?" I said, "Yes." "Well, I don't." And he was mad. He was mad at me for a good probably 6 months, but we eventually kind of laughed about it, and it kind of bonded to a good friendship with John Coffin, who is a good friend of mine to this day. And that's just one of the stories from the halls of Channel 5.
Thank you so much for that. That's wonderful. Wonderful story from WPTZ. That's great. Yeah, we all, as old timers, all remember the days of tape and razor blades, and yeah. I think we have one more story coming. Was it you? There was a gentleman in the back, but come on up. Come on up. Tell us your name. Okay.
My name is Laura Palkovic.
Laura Palkovic.
Hi. My story is sort of a journey because I was born down on Staten Island, but my father was born in Ottawa, Canada. And after he and my mom got married, they stayed on Staten Island, but every summer we would go up to Ottawa to visit his parents and my cousins, my millions of cousins. And in the early days, there was no I-87. It was Route 9, and then it was logging trails. And sometimes we would stop in Plattsburgh, maybe for an overnight, because my father's sister had been best friends with a lady named Mary Eagleson who married Dr. Ned Delbel, who some of you may remember. And so sometimes we'd stay with them. And then we would go off into this exotic place called the Adirondacks, and then eventually ride in Ogdensburg. And when we got to Ogdensburg and we got on the ferry, which was the ferry at a time, then we knew we were close to my grandparents' house. So, fast forward, at the age of 16, my family moved from Staten Island, New York, to Marin County, California for my father's job. And as soon as that plane landed at San Francisco Airport, I'm thinking, how do I get back to New York? And I didn't really want to go back to New York City. And because of the generosity of the Delbel family, I was able to transfer in my sophomore year to Plattsburgh, and I finished up college here. Now, prophetically, I arrived in January of 1972 and came in a blizzard to Montreal, and then Mary Delbel came and picked me up. All right. So I finished up my school time here in Plattsburgh, and I liked the place very, very much. Fast forward, I move away, I get married. It's not a very happy marriage. And I was a theater major, and I was going to be an actress. So fast forward, I'm an occupational therapist. Okay. I got an associate's degree in occupational therapy, and then a little while later, I got a bachelor's degree, which means that I love higher education, I love college, but only on the undergraduate level. So after my marriage broke up, fortuitously, I was back in Albany and working and thinking, I don't have to stay in Albany. I can go anywhere I want, and where would I like to go? And I thought, I was happy in Plattsburgh. Why don't I go up to Plattsburgh and see if there's any work available? And this was just after the airbase closed. So I came back up. It was the Mayor's Cup race. And I didn't even know you had a Mayor's Cup race. I didn't even know you had a mayor. So I was walking around town, and I talked to a few people, and I talked to a gentleman in one of the little stores. It was called the Dragonfly, I believe, at the time. Now it's Dress Code. So anyway, he was talking to me about it, and he goes, well, no, things were a little hard for a while, but they're sort of picking up, so yeah, you should give it a shot. I said, okay, thanks. And while I was there that July, I thought, I'm going to go back to the theater department at Plattsburgh. I know that all of the old instructors are either moved away or they're dead, but let me just see. So I'm walking through, and I go into Dr. Klein's old office, and there's a guy sitting there, and he goes, and I go and go, oh, I said, Tim Palkovic? And he says, Laura Domingo? I go, no, Coombs. Both of us are very good at faces, but we're no good at names. So we chatted for a while, and I said, well, you know, I'm living in Albany, and I'm kind of thinking of maybe moving somewhere else. And he goes, and I said, no, I'm divorced. He goes, oh, that's too bad. He says, I think I'm getting a divorce. I said, oh, that's too bad. And so fast forward a little farther, and I did get a job in Albany. I worked there for a while, and then I was between jobs. So I thought, I'm going to come up to Plattsburgh. It was November. It was a lovely time of the year, and I thought, I'll go in and stop and see if Tim's, I called him, and I said, I'm going to be coming up. Why don't we go out to lunch? And he goes, okay. So we do, and we went to Carver's, as it then was, and I'm looking at him. He's sitting across from me, and I go, he's marinated pretty well in 26 years. And so within 6 months, I was back up in Plattsburgh. And I started out at the hospital, got a few other jobs, and then settled in with Clinton County Home Health Care. And this meant that I was driving all over the county, and I was visiting people in their homes. I love driving, I love going through the county, I love seeing everything. I liked being in the homes with people because I was on their home territory. They had the home court advantage. I would ask, what do you need, what do you want to do that you can't do right now? And they would tell me, and sometimes it would just be some little trick I had. Sometimes I would make them something as simple as a little thing that would go in the back of the shoe, so instead of having to try to bend over, you could step in and push your foot down, and they'd think I was a goddess. The only downside to being in the North Country is that winter comes early and stays late. And I can recall one incident. It was a Friday. I was in Churubusco. It was like 3:30 in the afternoon, and there was a blizzard going on. So I'm coming back along Route 11 trying to get to Rouse's Point, where my next patient was, and I was in a whiteout. I had never been in a whiteout. I'd heard about them, but I'd never actually not been in one. And I'm driving along Route 11, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm going to go off the road on the right side, if I've already gone over to the left side, if I'm riding down the middle, and I can't see anything coming at me. I may die soon. And then suddenly the snow kind of lifted up, and I look over to the right, and there are the two mourning figures standing at the entrance to St. Edmund's Cemetery. And I thought, okay, I know where I am, and if I die now, I'm in a very convenient place. So I had that job for 9 years, and that last winter that I worked for home health care, I had my only accident. I was trying to come up one of the little roads in Moores. I had stopped, it was very icy, turned left, started heading that way, until I hit the ice spot that made the car go that away. I thought, okay, I'm going to go off the road and down in the ditch. And then the car turned around to 180. I go, okay, I'm not going to go off the road on that side. No, I went off the road that way and into a ditch. They finally got me pulled out. And that's when I went to my supervisor and said, look, I just want to let you know that when my car dies, I'm stopped. I'm done with work here. So I was hoping to get 200,000 miles on the Subaru. I made it to about 180 when it finally died. Again, going up to visit somebody way up on a hill, on the way down, it died just past the little bridge over the creek. So they were able to bring in a tow truck, hoist the car up on there, and they took me to Charlie McGee's. And Charlie said, so what's the matter? I said, it's not running. He goes, okay, well, turn it on. So I turn it on, and he listens, and he goes, mm-mm, mm-mm-mm. And I said, no, it's a goner. So that was when I walked into my supervisor's office, and I said, remember I said, when the car dies, I'm going to be leaving work here? She goes, yeah. I go, it's dead. It's dead. But the point of the story is, I came back to a place I loved. I had a job that, for the most part, I enjoyed quite a bit and was very satisfying. And I came out of a period where I had been very unhappy. I came to a place where I was happy. I got a job I was happy. And I married the man I was supposed to be married to in the first place. And so here I am today.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's been great hearing your stories of work and love and adventures across Clinton County. Amy, Claire, is there anything else you want these folks to know before we wrap it up tonight? Big thanks again to the Chapel Association, to the Historical Association. You guys are doing great work. And don't forget to visit us at ncpr.org/work. Give yourself a few hours. You will get sucked in. It's an amazing experience to travel through the work archives we've put together already, and it continues to grow. So thank you all for coming out tonight. And your stories are all going into that archive, of course.